Dr. Dean Ornish, welcome back to the Plan Trainers podcast.
It's great to be back. Thanks so much for having me.
No problem. You were last on episode 295, where we talked a little bit more about heart disease. We're going to change up the subject today. And before we get into that, do you have a moment of gratitude that you'd like to share with us and our listeners?
Oh, gosh. Well, I think I have gratitude almost every morning when I wake up. I kind of look back over what happened the previous day, and we have so much to be grateful for. My 18-year-old son graduated a few days ago, so I'm especially grateful for that. Those milestones, it's often like when I ask people, why do you want to change your lifestyle? They'll often say, well, I want to live longer. And I'll say, well, why do you want to live longer? And they'll say, gosh, no one's ever asked me that before. And they think about it and they say, well, I want to watch my son grow up and graduate, or dance at their wedding or whatever. So it's one of those milestone events that you really kind of put things in perspective. And he's 6'4". He's 4 inches taller than I am now. I remember when he was small enough I could, carry him like a football under my arm. Our 9-year-old girl came up to me the other day. She said, Dad, it goes so fast. It's like, yes, it really does. So, yeah, every moment is precious.
That's cute. Congratulations on that. And what does he want to do with his life going forward? Does he have any ideas?
Yeah, he's very interested in music. He's Quincy Jones is his godfather, so he's been mentoring him for his whole life. So he's got a very cool godfather mentor, and he's become a very accomplished musician. And he's also interested in computers. He's built 6 or 7 computers just from parts. And so I think he's going to the New School in New York City. So he'll be in the Village there, and he'll get a chance to go to a lot of great, music and jazz clubs. And he's interested in the interface between artificial intelligence and music. So we'll see what he does with that.
Great. I saw that, I'm remembering on Instagram that he's very musical. Yeah.
Yeah, we saw that post that you posted a picture of your family, and he was towering over you guys. And we'll put a link in our show notes to your social media so people can see that picture and laugh just like we just did.
Yeah, he kind of like stuck up to me, hello, Dad, put his arm on my shoulder, his elbow.
We'll be there one day too, for sure.
How old are yours?
Our son is turning 11 next month, and our daughter's turning 9 in 2 weeks.
Enjoy it. There's something to be said about adolescences so that you're not quite so sad when they leave. It's an interesting time.
It is. And I mean, it's a good segue into what we wanted to talk about. We wanted to talk about stressing less. And I'm really interested in hearing your take on how parents' stress gets transferred into children and can affect their health.
Oh, that's interesting. Well, one of the best things that I've learned, I think, about parenting is that the best gift you can give your kids is to model a loving, healthy relationship. I mean, there's a reason why therapists always ask you to talk about your parents when you go there, because how we interact with other people is basically what we've observed in our parents. And on one extreme, if they're really loving, happy people, then you feel like the world is a safe place and you can go out in the world with an open heart, and it's a beautiful way to live. If you've been abused by a parent, on the other extreme, physically or sexually, emotionally, if the person who's supposed to protect you more than anyone actually harms you, it feels like intimacy is dangerous and it's very unsafe. And a number of studies have shown that people who had abusive relationships were much more likely when they get older to develop a whole range of chronic diseases and die prematurely. There was an interesting study called the Harvard Mastery of Stress Study. And they asked people in Harvard Medical School's entering class, did you have a close relationship with your parents? Just one test, and I don't remember, it was like 30 or 40 years later, they found those that said, yes, I had a close relationship with my parents. 15% of them were dead. Those that said no, 50% were dead. So these things really make a difference because we learn how to model our relationships from what we learn with our parents. And so in that context, sometimes when I talk with people, I'll ask you, to which organ does your heart pump blood first? What would you guess?
Your brain.
I don't.
Your brain. Most people say your brain. Some people pick other body parts they like even more. Turns out your heart pumps blood to itself first through what are called coronary arteries. And if those arteries get clogged, then the heart doesn't get enough blood flow and it can cause chest pain or even a heart attack and die. So is that a selfish act for the heart to pump blood to itself first? Well, maybe, but it's also the most unselfish thing because if it doesn't take care of itself, then, the rest of the body dies too. It's kind of like when you're on an airplane and they say if the cabin should depressurize and the oxygen masks come down, put it on yourself first and then on your small kid, because if you put it on your small kid and then you pass out, then the kid won't know what to do. So I think that this idea of taking time for ourselves and our relationship and having date nights and time to really nurture our relationships as parents and as lovers is really, you can take that to extreme, of course, but I think most people err on the side of putting your kids first. And when you realize that taking care of yourself, being healthy, being strong, being in a loving relationship, making time for yourself, making time for your spouse is really the best thing that you can do for your kids. And it really helps to reframe that so people can do that without feeling a sense of guilt or shame around it.
And then I guess you would say, without taking it to the extreme, parents making sure that they're not just showing emotion towards each other behind closed doors, and that there's hugging and maybe some pecks on the cheek and lovey talk in front of the children as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, our kids climb into bed with us. We have snuggle time first thing in the morning. It's really a beautiful thing. It just sets a tone for the rest of the day. So yeah, I agree with that.
So we just said that somebody who was maybe abused by their parents. So, I've had clients where, one person in particular that I'm thinking of had abuse done to her when she was a child, was raised by grandparents, had an unhealthy relationship with food, is now approaching 40 years old and is going through so many different health problems, is scared, it spends every day scared that she's going to die, not be there for all of her children. And she's in a completely different place now. Her first relationship wasn't great. Her second relationship now is amazing, and she's changed her life around completely. But what do people who have been in a situation like her do, where they've just heard you say more likely to die early, more likely to have health problems? How do they undo it? No pun intended.
Well, in our new book, Undo It, we have 4 sections: eat well, move more, stress less, and love more. And the love more and the stress less, let me just kind of combine those two for the moment. Because to me, intimacy is healing. Even the word healing comes from the root to make whole, and yoga comes from the Sanskrit to yoke, to unite, union. These are really old ideas that we're rediscovering. And study after study have shown that people who are lonely and depressed and isolated, which I think is the real epidemic in our culture, are 3 to 10 times more likely to get sick and die prematurely from pretty much everything when compared to those who have a sense of love and connection and community. I don't know anything in medicine that has that kind of impact, both directly and indirectly, because you're much more likely to abuse yourself, to overeat or drink too much or work too hard or so on when you're feeling lonely and depressed. I've had patients say things to me like, I've got 20 friends in this pack of cigarettes and they're always there for me and nobody else is. You're going to take away my 20 friends, what are you going to give me? Or food fills the void, or fat coats my nerves and numbs the pain, or alcohol or opioids or other drugs numb the pain, or video games numb the pain, or working all the time numbs the pain, and so on. So we've learned that information is important, but it's not usually sufficient to motivate most people to change. If it were, nobody would smoke. It's not like I say, hey, guess what? Did you know smoking is bad for you? They go, well, I didn't know that. It's like everybody knows that. So it's not enough to just give information. We're drowning in information in the era of Google. Or to even focus on the behaviors, we need to work at a deeper level. What is the cause? That's really the overarching theme of all of our work. And in the case of if you've grown up with distant parents, like in this Harvard study I mentioned earlier, or worse, abusive relationship, then you learn that intimacy is dangerous, because you can only be intimate with someone and connected with them to the degree that you can be emotionally vulnerable. You can open your heart to them. And you can only do that to the degree it feels safe. And so if you grew up in a family where you were sexually or physically, emotionally abused, particularly by the person who, above all, if it's a parent or a close relative who's supposed to be protecting you and they actually abuse you, it's incredibly damaging, because now it's like, who do you trust? Trust is really everything in a relationship, because you can only be vulnerable to the degree that you feel safe because you trust that person not to hurt you. So what do? Well, I think awareness is always the first step in healing. And I had some abuse in my family when I was growing up. And so I decided that I was, getting in relationships that were really unhealthy, because I learned that if intimacy is dangerous, then you don't want to just be with one person because that's a little too intimate. Some people eat and they become overweight as a way of kind of literally and physically distancing themselves. Or in my case, I would be with more than one person at a time when I was first dating. That if I got too close to one person, I could, immediately turn my attention to the other. That kind of triangulation is a very effective but ultimately frustrating way of modulating intimacy. And so I decided that I needed to do some really serious work on myself. And so I decided I needed to find a therapist who was smarter and trickier than I was. So I interviewed a number of people, and my little voice said, "This is the one." And this guy looked like Solzhenitsyn in Birkenstocks. I said, "No, this can't be the one." I said, "No, this is the one." And I learned to trust that little voice. And sure enough, and I decided I needed to make that a priority. And for years, this was really my number one priority. It's what enabled me to do enough growth that enabled me to be in the relationship that I've been in now with my partner and wife, Anne, who I co-authored this Undo It book with. We've been together now for over 20 years. We've been married for close to 15. And we're totally, committed and monogamous because, I always thought that being in a monogamous relationship was kind of boring, that the whole 60s thing and now the whole polyamorous thing and so on. And it's not so much a moral issue. It's not a moral issue. It's just like, how can you live a life that's the most fun and juicy and erotic and pleasurable and healthy? And what I learned is that paradoxically, there's an Indian wise person 100 years ago named Ramakrishna. He'd say, you can dig a lot of shallow wells and never reach water. You can dig one deep one and reach the wellspring. And what I learned is that rather than having the same kind of experience with different people, with my wife Anne, we have these infinitely variable experiences that are more pleasurable, erotic, intimate, joyful, playful, intelligent, all the things that make life fun. And they're infinitely variable because, like when we, to me, great art or great science or great music comes from being able to approach an issue with beginner's mind, without preconceptions. I worked my way through school as a photographer, and I got to study my last couple of years in college with a photographer named Gary Winogrand, who was one of the great photographers of the 20th century. He was also a great teacher. And he put a picture up on the wall. He'd say, "What do you see?" And people would say, "Oh, I see this," or I say that. I said, "Well," he challenged us. He said, "How do you know someone doesn't have a gun right outside the frame? Or how do you know this? You're assuming all these things." And to try to get us to see with fresh eyes, which to me is the difference between, innovation, true creativity, and imitation, just trying to recreate something. So when Anne and I are going to have a date, we're not trying to recreate an experience that we've already had, however wonderful that might have been, because we trust each other. And the trust, is like layers of an onion. It's not just binary. It's like the more you trust, the more you can open up. The heart goes, well, gee, maybe it is safe. It's like I wake up in the morning, I look over, wow, she's still there. It's a good day, and you begin to trust more and more and more. And as you trust more, your heart opens more. And as your heart opens more, you become more intimate. And the secret that I never learned, and I still haven't really read anywhere, you heard it here first, is that the more intimate you are, the more erotic it is, the more pleasurable it is. And so rather than trying to recreate a situation that we might have already experienced, we're open to all possibilities, all degrees of freedom. And I would say most of the time that we have a date, it's the most amazing erotic experience that either one of us has ever had, much less even imagined, and it just keeps it so fresh after all these years, as opposed to just kind of getting stuck in a rut somewhere. So taking that time, and I could never have done that, and it's still a prize. I'm still a work in progress, and I've done, we talked about before briefly that I was suicidally depressed when I was in college. I came very close, about as close to killing myself as you can without doing it. In part, I think, as a reaction to that sense of isolation and feeling stupid and like an imposter and so on. And so I decided, having made a decision not to do that, I decided, I'm going to lead a kind of a messy life. I have to find out for myself what's real and what isn't, what's true and what isn't. I'm going to make a lot of mistakes and do a lot of stupid stuff, but I'm going to learn from that. And there's a lot of wisdom that comes from making mistakes. And, later as a doctor, when I began to work with people on their deathbeds, they generally don't regret what they did. They generally regret what they didn't do. Because if you do something and it's stupid and you make a mistake, there's a lot of learning that comes from, a lot of wisdom that comes from making mistakes. So I have a lot of wisdom because I've done so many stupid things. But if you don't do it, you just have a lot of regret. Like, well, wonder what maybe I should have done that, or what if, or, so on. And I decided I didn't want to have a lot of those. So I've done a lot of things that have enabled me to get to this point. And I think, so which is a very long-winded way of saying, if you've been abused as a child or at some point in your life, get some help. These things are worth looking at. Find a therapist that you can trust, that you feel safe with, that can help you explore and reframe those examples, which ultimately can be a doorway to our transformation. One of the reasons I love doing this work so much is that, illness and suffering can be a doorway for change, because as you know, change is hard. But if you're hurting enough, suddenly the idea of change becomes more appealing. It's kind of like, wow, that's weird stuff, therapist or meditation or plant-based diet or exercise, gosh, I don't know about that. But if you're in enough pain, and again, part of the reason why I've spent 40 years conducting research is that the research says, in effect, look, if you're willing to make these changes in lifestyle and in the way that you live your life, you can transform that pain, into pleasure and into healing. And so I can't tell you how many patients have said things to me like, having a heart attack was the best thing that ever happened to me. You go like, the first time I heard that, I was like, what are you, nuts? And they say, no, that's what it took to get my attention to begin making these changes that I probably never would have done otherwise. And because these underlying biological mechanisms are so dynamic, most people feel so much better so quickly. And then it comes from your own experience. Then all these diet wars and so on kind of fall by the wayside. It's like, oh, when I eat this, when I do this, I feel good. When I do that, I don't feel so good. If I'm angry, if I'm judgmental towards myself or others, that doesn't feel so good. If I can be more loving and compassionate of myself and others, that's great. If I can eat healthier, meditate, and so on. And so then you literally connect the dots between what you do and how you feel. And then that becomes your teacher. It's like, oh, I studied for many decades with a spiritual teacher named Swami Satchidananda. And people would say, what are you, a Hindu? He'd say, no, I'm an Undu, which is where the title of the book came from. And when I first started studying with him, I'd say, oh, I'm so upset and I'm in pain. He'd go, well, good. I say, well, no, it's not good. It's bad. I don't like feeling this way. He goes, well, good. When you stop doing those things, now you want to do something about it. That's the whole function of pain, is to get our attention. I mean, unfortunately, I, like most doctors, were trained to view pain as the enemy. Like, you kill it, you numb it, you bypass it, literally or figuratively. But to me, the pain is the body and the soul saying, hey, listen up, pay attention. You're not doing something that's in your best interest. And then that begins the journey of inquiry that hopefully, and that's why we wrote this book, can help people use the experience of suffering as a catalyst and as a doorway for transforming their lives.
So a lot of parents some parents went through the abuse that we talked about. They grew up with disconnected relationships with their parents. And so they're trying as parents now to be the best that they can be with their kids, and they want to give them and give them and give them and do everything kind of with them and for them. And it lends itself to the helicopter parent. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are on the parent who's maybe overdoing it and the impact that might have on their kids growing up.
So overprotecting or overcompensating.
Right.
Yeah, well, I've certainly been guilty of that. Ask my son, he'll tell you. But, it's hard being a parent. Being a parent is, I think, one of the hardest things you can do. It also happens to be one of the most rewarding things you can do. I remember I was asking a close friend of mine when we were about to have kids. I said, what's it like? And this is a guy who was super accomplished. He's a household name. And he said, well, it's 10,000 times better than anything I've ever done. I said, well, you've done a lot of cool stuff. That says a lot. And he thought about it some more. He said, that's probably an underestimation. And it's true. It's way better than anything I've ever done. But he also said that your heart is forever outside your body. And I think there's some truth to that too. And so, you want your child to do well. And so it's always trying to find the balance between giving them the most opportunities to, explore and find their own path and give them the skills that they need. And then also letting them make their own mistakes. And so now that my son's 18, there's a tendency for me to want to still kind of say, well, you need this assignment in school, or, you have to make sure you keep your grades up the last semester because you don't want them to withdraw your college application, all this kind of stuff. And then I have to kind of catch myself and go, oh, okay, you're 18 now. If you need me, let me know. This spiritual teacher I talked with you about a moment ago, the Swami, when I was first doing studies and I learned that we could reverse heart disease, and I'd see people eating a cheeseburger, I'd go, why would you want to do that? And, they would not necessarily find that to be the most effective time to intervene. And the Swami go, well, did they ask you? And I say, well, no, but he goes, well, did they ask you? So I'm trying to take that more with my son, especially now that he's 18. But it's a delicate balance. I'm sure as parents you've have your own versions of that.
Yeah.
I don't think that you've had this experience per se, but if anybody listening has had this experience, I want them to go to Instagram at Plant Trainers and find the podcast cover for this show and write me a message underneath. If any woman out there has seen their child either get hurt or do something that could hurt them emotionally or hurt them physically, and you get birthing pains come back. Have you heard of that before? I'll see my kids will trip and fall or fall off their bike or say that somebody was mean to them at school, and I'll literally have birthing pains come right back to me.
I don't feel them.
Because you never had the birthing pains in the first place, let me remind you.
Yeah, well, there's a book somebody wrote called The Wisdom of the Skinned Knee, which I think is about that, I taught my 9-year-old girl when she was, 5 how to use a sharp knife to cut with, I knew that she was going to cut herself at some point. But again, it's, I said, look, as my dad, I've got to teach you how to swim. I've got to teach you how to fight. So we did karate together so you can be nonviolent, because you can only really be nonviolent if you know how to fight, because then you can walk away from anything. You don't feel like people will sense that and they won't pick on you. I have to, teach you how to do certain things. But beyond that, it's really trying to find that right balance, and it can be challenging.
Definitely can. I just want to go back a little bit to the people who had abuse when they were young. Do you find that there's a trend in the type of diseases that they develop later on as adults, or can it manifest into anything?
The studies show, there was a study at Kaiser where they looked at people who'd been abused, and there are others like that. And it's all causes, really. It's not any particular one. In fact, the abuse is just, again, one end of that spectrum. But throughout the spectrum, people who are lonely and depressed, which I think is the real epidemic, as we talked about earlier, are 3 to 10 times more likely to get sick and die prematurely of virtually all causes when compared to those who have a sense of love and connection and community. Now, the radical transformation that's occurred in our culture in the last 50 years has been the disruption of those social networks. 50 years ago, most people had an extended family they saw regularly. They had a neighborhood with 2 or 3 generations of people who grew up together. They had a job that felt secure. They'd been at for 10 years or more. They had a church or a synagogue or a mosque or a club or something that they would go to regularly. And most people today don't have any of those. And we're learning how much we've given up by that. And social media doesn't really do it because it's not a real authentic intimacy. In fact, one of the studies that we quote in our new book, in the Undo It book, is that the more time you spend on Facebook, the more depressed you are. And the reason is that it looks like it's not a real intimacy. It looks like everybody has this perfect life but you, because most people don't post their demons and their doubts and their fears. And, when you grow up in a family with 2 or 3 generations of people, they know you. They don't just know your Facebook profile or your bio sketch. They know where you messed up, and they saw you, when you were really depressed, or you threw that rock through the window when you were a kid, or whatever it happened to be. And you know that they know, and they know that you know that they know, and they're still there for you. It's kind of like in that wonderful movie Avatar that James Cameron did. It's like, I see you, which is really from an African proverb. I don't just see you, your good stuff. I see all of you, and I'm really there for you. And there's something really primal about that. And so in the support groups of our program that Medicare and other insurance companies were paying for reversing heart disease, which is the same model that we found for all of these studies, the support groups are not designed to help support people being on the diet, which is what most people think they're going to be. It's really recreating that sense of community by putting people in a room together and say, look, this is really as important as anything else, is creating that sense of intimacy. And so we're going to practice doing that here by, what goes in the group stays in the group, by focusing on your feelings and communicating them as feelings, because our feelings are really much more likely to be heard than our thoughts and judgments. Can I just give you a quick example of that? Yeah, I'm sure you know this already, but close your eyes just for a moment and tell me how it feels when I say the following. I think you're a jerk and I think you're wrong. Now open your eyes. Now, I'm just playing, but still at some visceral level, how did that feel? Or how would it feel if that were real?
It didn't feel very good. I was already getting angry that you just said that to me.
Uh-huh.
I didn't deserve it. I didn't do anything to deserve that.
I felt my face crunch up.
Yeah, you contracted, right?
Yeah.
And then what would you do next if this were real life? Or what would most people do?
Most people would react to it and say
doing what?
Say something negative back.
Yeah, no, I'm not a jerk, you're a jerk, right, or something like that. They attack, or what's the other strategy?
I'm sorry, feel that way, I don't see it the same way, and just
that's
let it go, walk away.
Or walk away, that's the point. So either we attack back or we withdraw. Either you literally walk away, as you say, or you just stop listening, right? But if the idea is that intimacy is healing, which it is, both of those strategies move us more towards suffering and ultimately disease, right? Okay, now close your eyes again. I'm going to try a little different. Tell me how this feels. I feel angry and I feel upset. Then open your eyes. Same or different?
Completely different.
Different.
That was all about you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's not about making nice. It's not about the power of positive thinking. They're, quote, negative emotions. I'm angry, I'm upset, and yet it draws you in, right? I mean, did you feel like you want to learn more about why I felt that way?
For sure. What's going on? How can we help?
Yeah. Hey, how can I help? It actually brings you in. And again, bringing us together is healing. So what's the difference between the first? It wasn't about making nice or, saying just positive things. The difference is the first was a thought, a judgment. And thoughts generally get heard as judgments and criticisms, and then we either attack or withdraw. But it's our feelings that connect us. The second was, I feel angry and upset. Those are feelings. If it's a thought, we can argue about whether it's true or not. If it's a feeling, you can't tell me I don't feel that way. That's how I feel. But it also makes me a little bit vulnerable because I'm sharing with you a feeling. And so it allows you space to come in. And so in the groups that we have, we ask people we go around the circle. We say, close your eyes and just say, identify what you're feeling. Not what you think you should be feeling or what you want to be feeling, but what you actually are feeling. And then just go around and just in a few words say what you're feeling. And then people can ask each other to learn more about that. And it sounds so touchy-feely, and I used to get really defensive and say, oh, no, look at our hard science and our quantitative arteriograms and our radionuclide ventriculography and our spec value and blah, blah, blah. And then one day I said, you know what? It is touchy-feely. That's what makes it work so well. We are touchy-feely creatures. That's how we've survived as a species, is that sense of primal acceptance and community. That's, by looking out for each other. And so to me, the value of these so-called stress management techniques is that, yes, they are very powerful at managing stress. But, the ancient swamis and rabbis and priests and monks and nuns didn't develop these techniques just to unclog their arteries or lower their blood pressure or perform better in sports or do better in business. I mean, it can do all those things. They're actually very powerful tools for transformation because what they do is they quiet our mind and body down enough to experience more of an inner sense of peace and well-being and to realize that's really our natural state. Once you get past all the stuff, even the abuse, that's our whole, we're whole already. We think that we have to get that from outside of ourselves. And once you believe that, and the whole advertising industry reinforces that, if only I had more money, more power, more sex, more beauty, more accomplishment, whatever, then I'd be happy, then I could love myself, then everything would be good. Generally, however, it turns out you don't feel so good because if you don't get it, you feel bad. If someone else gets it and you don't, then you really feel bad, and it makes you feel like this reinforcement of this zero-sum game, dog-eat-dog, hostile, the more you get, the lesser is me kind of world. But even if you get it, it's very seductive in the moment. It's like, I got it, now I'm happy. But then invariably it's either followed by now what, it's never enough, or so what, big deal. And so the cycle continues. And so what I learned from the Swami is to say, again, it's about undoing, is to say, it's not out there. If I can quiet down my mind and body, that these techniques, these meditation and yoga or prayer, whatever secular or religious that you use to quiet down your mind, don't bring you a sense of peace, but rather it's already there. What they do is to help us identify and to stop disturbing what's already there, as opposed to thinking we have to get it from outside ourselves. Now, that may sound like we're just, semantics and parsing words, but the implications are profound because if it's out there, then everybody who has what we think we need has power over us. If it's me, not to blame, but to empower myself, I can say, I can stop doing that. But if you take it even further, the meditation quiets your mind so much that it gives you the direct experience of transcendence, that on one level, we are separate. You're you and I'm me. But on another level, we're part of something larger that connects us all. And even to give it a name is to limit what's essentially a limitless or infinite or ineffable experience, that it's all you in different forms. And so to me, what the studies are showing, just as abuse and isolation are so toxic and can lead to chronic diseases, both directly through patterns of behavior and indirectly, or more, or indirectly through patterns of behavior and directly through these mechanisms, love and compassion and forgiveness and altruism, and what Aldous Huxley called the perennial philosophy, really what free us and what heal us and what enable us to go back to our natural ease as opposed to disturbing that ease and getting literally diseased. And so it's a very empowering realization. And all these spiritual truths like love and compassion and forgiveness just flow naturally. I mean, if it's just you in different forms, then of course you can do that. And one of the things that my wife and I have been exploring more recently is one of the things that's so cool about being in a totally committed monogamous relationship is that, so often it's portrayed as the ball and chain, and so stifling, which it can be. But in this context, it's liberating for the reasons we talked about, because, you feel that sense of safety. You can open up and really be with each other in these ways. But also, it provides the freedom that, it's like, okay, if we're really going to be together forever, and at some, in the back of your mind, you go, well, people get divorced and da-da-da, and, I was married before, so I can certainly appreciate that. But if you really, the longer you're together and the more you commit to each other and the more you trust each other, the more you really believe at this visceral level, okay, we're really going to be together forever. And we committed to not only this lifetime, but all lifetimes to come, just so there's no outs. And as a way of making it liberating, actually not confining. And so once you really, the implication of that is, okay, if we're really going to be together forever and we have a misunderstanding, a little fight, it's like, okay, we're eventually going to get to a good place. So why don't we just skip right to that place? Why don't we just leave out all the stuff in the middle, and like, instead of getting to that kind of angry, righteous, like, you did this or you didn't do that kind of place. But then I'm like, if I'm right, then she's got to be wrong. And if I love her and her happiness is my happiness, so if she's wrong, then I'm going to be happy. And if I'm wrong, then I'm going to be unhappy. So why don't we just let go of this idea of who's right or wrong and what can we learn from this, and just let it go and just immediately go to that place. And if one of us can at least remember to do that. And, we sometimes say to each other, and when we're in those more centered moments, how do we remember when we forget? And say, well, you asked me to remind you. Well, I'm reminding you, And if we both forget, then it can be really awful. But then one of us sooner or later remembers, and then we can get to that place sooner and sooner, which, as you get older, you feel like every day is precious. Like, okay, I could spend my days being very self-righteously unhappy. One day I want to write a book called The Moskowitz Gene, because my mother's side of the family are the Moskowitzes. And they're all brilliant and they're all miserable, And they can come up with all these reasons why they're miserable and totally justify being miserable and create a whole world around being miserable. And I thought, yeah, I can do that really well. And I've certainly, that's part of why I got so depressed when I was younger. But I don't have to, and as I get older, it's like every day is precious. I could spend being self-righteously miserable, or we could be making love and enjoying life and playing with our kids and going for a walk and, whatever, listening to great music. It's like, why wouldn't I want to do that? And so that's, to me, is part of the value of pain, is to remind us that we have other choices that we might not have realized. And then it makes life so much more joyful. I see you guys nodding. I'm just curious what that's like for you. What's your version of that?
So
there we go.
I'm the talker in the relationship, and through various stressful points in my life, I do find myself going down that rabbit hole of needing to blame other people for my own problems and not always, and and just being able to be in my misery for a certain amount of time until I can kick myself out of it. I don't know if I was always like that, or if that was something new that came up for me after the PTSD, after Adam's diagnoses and prognoses and all of that. But when we do get to that point, Adam's always the one who's like, shush, we don't need to talk about it again. Or, like, what's this conversation going to do? It's just going to make us more angry. And he's the one that can switch off. And I know that it's the biggest saying, and I'd like to hear your opinion on it. Never go to bed angry, right? Never go to bed angry. That's what people say. They say never go to bed angry. And I believe that we've gone to bed angry. I know that I've gone to bed angry, but waking up in the morning is a reset. And we haven't gone down that rabbit hole of saying things to each other that we might regret. And it's not that we can't deal with it, and it's not that we haven't argued before, but we were done in that argument, and there's no point in staying up all night and being miserably tired the next day when it's not going to change the outcome. If you're committed to each other, you're going to be that best person that next day anyway, and we've totally reset by going to bed angry, in my opinion. I don't know if you've gone to bed angry.
I try not to, because in the back of my mind, it's like, I gotta let it go, because that's not the way I want to, like, what if I don't get up in the morning? Right?
Yeah. So,
'cause I mean,
yeah. It's not that I'm having angry dreams all night. I think I've done that same thing. I've made that even though I feel like we can totally continue this, I've turned it off, I've let it go, and therefore I can sleep. But we haven't necessarily worked it out ourselves. We just know that it's working out. Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, sometimes, I mean, if you can work it out before bed, great. But sometimes it takes space to kind of just let those feelings settle. And it's not just with lovers, it's with kids. I mean, I remember when my son, who's now 18, we talked about earlier, was 2 or 3, sometimes he'd have these little meltdowns. And he has a very strong personality. I'm not sure where he gets that from, but yeah. and I learned that because when I grew up, I felt very disempowered, so I felt like I want our kids to really own their own power. This goes back to what you're asking about earlier. So even when they started to eat food, I'd say, look, nobody can tell you what to eat, not even me, and I'm your dad, and I know a lot more about food than most people because your body's your temple and you control it. So this is why we eat what we eat, but you never have to, the rule is you never have to eat anything ever. Boom, that's it. Because I knew that he would develop an eating disorder if I said, no, you can't eat this and you must eat that and so on. So sometimes in that same spirit, when he'd have a meltdown, and it's great to have, I don't ever usually talk about these kinds of things, so it's fun to have these conversations. And I say, what's going on? And he was like 3 years old. And he'd go, I say, well, okay, how long do you need to be upset? And he'd say, 3 minutes. I said, great, come back in 3 minutes, we'll talk. And so I wasn't trying to change his feelings. I wasn't trying to shame him. I wasn't criticizing him. I was meeting him where he was and say, okay, you're in control. How much time do you need? When will you be in a frame of mind that you're ready to talk? And then he'd come back and then we'd have a much better conversation. So likewise, you might say, well, look, I love you. I know we're going to get through this. I just need a little space. I don't want to say anything that's going to make it worse. Let's talk, in 3 minutes or in an hour in the morning or whenever it happens to be. As long as I just find that when people feel seen, it goes back to the I see you and regarded, then they're much more open to whatever you want to say, and they're much more likely to try to help you. This is an ongoing lesson that I've been trying to teach my son with varying degrees of success. That if you go to your teacher and you've got your iPhone had earbuds in and you're talking to them, they're not going to feel regarded. It goes back to what Maya Angelou famously said, people will remember how you made them feel much more than what you said. And look at people and don't be texting when you're talking to people, just give them your full attention and so on. So I think that really is true. It's really about making someone feel seen and regarded, even if you can't give them what they necessarily want in that particular moment. They're much more likely to receive it, and you're much more likely to give it if you can both feel seen and regarded, especially when you don't agree.
We know you have something very exciting that you want to share with our listeners, and we'll do that in a second. But I wanted to ask you this because there are a lot of men that listen to this show, and I know stereotypically men are not in tune with their emotions. They don't like to show their emotions on their sleeves. They don't like to talk about this love thing and be compassionate. And I've changed a lot.
You have.
Stop
you
it.
have.
But how receptive are men to the love more section of your book and the stress less? I mean, they're very good with the eat well and move more. They want to do the move more. Yeah. But the love more is something that I think men struggle with stereotypically. So how receptive have they been to that, and how do you see that?
Well, the love more is, the love more is, when you love more, you're making yourself vulnerable. We talked about earlier, you can only be intimate to the degree you can make yourself emotionally vulnerable. And for a guy who's out there, fighting and doing the stereotypical guy things of, bringing home the hunt and all of that, that feels like, wow, if I make myself vulnerable, someone's going to take advantage of me. Someone's going to hurt me. And we've all had that experience. And so that wall around the heart says, see, I told you it's not safe. And the problem comes, it's not that you should be open and vulnerable to everyone. The problem comes if you have nowhere that feels safe enough to do that and no one that you trust enough to do that with. Then these same walls are always up. And if they're always up, then they not only protect you, but they isolate you. And to the degree they isolate you, they make you more likely to get sick and die prematurely. So the very thing that we think that we're doing that's protecting us is the very thing that may be harming us and even killing us. And so part of the value of the research is that when people come into our program and they say, well, gosh, Medicare is paying for it and it's been published in all these leading journals and books and blah, 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 it must be true. But, I get the diet and, got to eat. It's just a question of what. And, when you're out there exercising, you're really doing something. But I don't know, there's meditation and love more stuff. I mean, I don't know. That sounds kind of wussy to me. And yet I want my heart to get better. So, okay, if that's what I got to do, then I'll do it, kind of reluctantly. And yet, almost invariably, the guys are the ones who find the support group to be the most meaningful, precisely because we're not used to having that experiences in other areas of our lives, except maybe with our spouse, and often not even with that. And so, the support groups in our earlier studies, the study might be, a month long or a year long, and then in the hospitals and clinics and doctors, and we've been training for the last 8 years or so throughout the country. The program's 9 weeks long. And then, in our earlier studies, sometimes decades later, these people are still having their support groups together, long after the study ended. And these are people who didn't even like each other that much when they first started, because it was so meaningful to be able to connect at such a deep level. And I think that, when you can really connect with someone at that level, it's powerful. And because it's a more of a unique experience for guys, it's that much more meaningful for them when they're guided in being able to do that. And ultimately, they realize how much more power it gives them because, it goes back like Nelson Mandela when he did his long walk to freedom after being in jail for 16 years. He said, well, do you still hate your captors, your jailers? He said, well, they took away the best years of my life. But if I still hate them, then I still have anger in my heart. I'm still in prison in my heart. And the one emotion that has been found in all these studies to be toxic, especially to heart disease, it's not talking fast. It's not type A behavior, fortunately for people like me. It's not multitasking. It's chronic anger and hostility. In fact, there was a study that came out that looked at 150 million Twitter feeds, and they found that the more anger that was expressed in them, the more likely those people were to get sick and die prematurely. So because when you're angry with someone, it's like, it's the one finger pointing at you and the three fingers pointing at me. It's toxic to both of us. And so forgiveness doesn't condone or excuse what someone else does, but it frees us from the suffering that goes along with that. And so I think as people begin to realize those things, they realize that talking about your feelings is not a wussy, weak thing to do, but actually it's the most empowering thing to do because ultimately it's, again, people only have power over you if they have something that you need. And when you forgive them and let that go, then you're no longer in that toxic dance with you. And it really is very empowering and liberating and ultimately healing.
I heard about a study, and I want to be careful of the time, but it reminds me of a study that I heard where they're actually treating girls stereotypically like they would boys and boys stereotypically like they would girls in a specific school. Have you heard of that study?
No.
And I'm really interested to hear what I don't know if it's ethical. I think that we should be just treating everybody the same. But I'm really interested to hear how that study is going to come out, if it really does exist. I haven't looked into it, but that's what I heard about. And usually when I say I heard, it means that I don't have proof. I need to go look it up.
Well, send me a link to it if you find it. I'd love to learn more about it.
I will definitely do that. So this podcast is coming out on June 11th, 2019, and on June 13th, something very exciting is happening for you. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Oh, well, lots of good things are happening, but this is, I'll be a guest on Ellen DeGeneres' show. And apparently it's the first author she's had on there who wasn't a Hollywood person for 3 or 4 years. So I feel very appreciative. She's been on a plant-based diet for many years. We taped it already. It was really fun. And we ended up talking about some really exciting things. So I hope people can tune into that. It will be a good time.
Did you dance?
We didn't dance, but we ended up talking a lot about sex, so that was fun.
Sweet. Oh, great. All right. So listeners, you heard that. Tune in to Ellen, tape it, go to whatever it is that you need to do to make sure that you see it. Not tape it, but PVR it. PVR it.
We're dating ourselves.
Definitely.
Oh, Dr. Ornish, it's always awesome to have you on the show. This is the second time we have you. It's always great to talk to you, and I love that we did this video together because it was really nice having the interaction this way. Too. We're going to link to your social media. We'll put a link in with the Ellen Show so people could find that. It'll be at planttrainers.com/307, and we'll also link to your book, Undo It, How Simple Lifestyle Changes Can Reverse Most Chronic Diseases, so people that haven't yet picked it up have that opportunity to do so.
Thank you. Let me just say in closing how much I appreciate this. The book is really the distillation of 40 years of work to really make it radically simple. It starts with a quote by Albert Einstein, who says, if you can't make it simple, you don't understand it well enough. And having spent most of my life doing this, we reduce it down to its essence. Eat well, move more, stress less, love more. And the more diseases we study and the more mechanisms we look at, the more evidence we have to show how these simple changes can be so powerful that they may, under your doctor's supervision, help you get off of medication that you were told you have to take forever, or avoid surgery, or be able to actually reverse these conditions in ways that, were thought impossible just a few short years ago. So it's a very empowering book. I hope you find it helpful. And to me, awareness is always the first step in healing. So thank you for being such bright lights and shining a light in the darkness. I'm really grateful.
Thank you. We're grateful you're here.
Thank you.